we've put our trust in him and we choose to keep following him. That is what is important. And I think this morning, for me, and for you maybe, that's what we need to remember. We can so easily forget this because life comes at us sometimes so quick and surprisingly and sometimes in a way that we just can't handle. And we can easily forget that our answer is Jesus. We don't need these big answers. We don't need a big solution or a big... We just need to come to Jesus. And sometimes that's the last thing we do. Sometimes that's the last thing I do. And you have to keep realizing, no, come back. And this morning, let's not rush past this moment. Let's stay in it a little bit. Because I do feel this morning, this is what we all need to remember. I'm sure we're all going through different things this morning. Health issues maybe, family issues, doubts, work problems. The list is endless. I could be here all day. But the fact is, we have an answer. And it isn't to try and look for some massive solution. It's to come to Jesus and allow him to do what he does best. Very simple, isn't it? But quite often, we don't think of this first for some reason. And if you do, well done. You'll have to teach the ones that struggle with that. What sums my point up is Jesus dying on the cross, the two thieves either side. One recognises Jesus and says, this man has done nothing wrong. He should not be here. He does not deserve to be on this cross. And Jesus turns to him and says, he says, remember me. And Jesus says, I truly tell you this, you will be with me in paradise. Why? What did he do in his life? He was a criminal. Does a criminal get into heaven? Yeah, he does. If he turns his face to Jesus. That's all he did. All he did was recognize Jesus. That was enough for him to go to heaven. Amen. Now, for us as Christians, we're here. We can't use that excuse of, we know Jesus. We have to follow him, of course. We have to trust him. But he's here this morning. What's your issue this morning? Do you need healing? Do you need encouragement? Do you need support? You know what you need. Ask him. Don't ask me, but you can ask me. But ask him first. He's got the answer. We're going to be looking at... That's nothing to do with what I'm talking about, really. We're going to be looking at this morning, the feeding of the 5,000. Now, Jesus used a lot of parables and stories, which I like. One of the stories and parables he used was the wise and foolish builder, talking about somebody who builds on strong foundations or on weak foundations. The sand means, we don't trust God, we do our own thing and we've got our own solutions, which I've just been talking about. As Christians, we believe our solution is Jesus. The solid foundation is putting our trust in Jesus, obedience and following. And then we've got the storm. The storm represents the problems we have in the world and in our lives. But also, what do we see in the storm? God's glory. God at work. I want you to remember that word this morning as we go through this sermon. God at work in your life and in all our lives. And there's a way that happens, and we're going to be looking at that. So this morning we're going to be looking at the feeding of the 5,000, and it's mentioned in all four Gospels, as most of you probably know. And they all have certain aspects that they look more upon. More look on the compassion. Some look at kind of the testing of the faith of the disciples. Others of the grieving of Jesus. The one I'm looking at this morning, I like the most because I feel it's the most complete. It's not just talking about the feeding of the 5,000. We quite often think when we hear this, it's about the feeding of the 5,000. It isn't. It's a part of it, but it's much bigger than the feeding of the 5,000. There is a big symbolism in that, and there's a lot of stuff going on. But what happens before the feeding of the 5,000? It says in verse 13, that Jesus had to withdraw into a quiet place because of what happened. What happened? Well, we know if we go before that his dear friend, John the Baptist, had been killed. So before we even get into the feeding of the 5,000 and all this stuff, what do we get? We really understand, before any of this is happening, that we have a God who cares for us, who pays attention to us and to our needs. How do we know this with John? Because he just died. Well, before that, way before that, he was in prison. He was in prison, and he was a strong man, John, had a strong faith, probably stronger than most of us here this morning, but he wobbled, quite understandably, in prison, probably knowing his life might have been on the line, I don't know, but he wobbled. Is this the man who was meant to be here to show the way? A strong man of God like John. None of us are stronger than God. We all need that reassurance sometimes that God is here, who he says he is. And John needed that, and he got it through Jesus. He sent somebody to tell him, this is what's been happening. You have been correct. Jesus is the one. And that reassured his faith, gave him confidence, gave him courage to face what he was facing. We're not even looking at the feeding of the 5,000 yet. But what are we seeing? God's love and care for us. And we see even more when he realized John has died. He grieves for him. He grieves for us, for our circumstances, for our situations. He cares for us. He doesn't sit there in judgment. He grieves when we grieve. God created us. He didn't create us to be robots, did he? He created us with feelings. He wants us to communicate. If we feel, he'll feel it. So he grieves for us. So whatever circumstance we might find ourselves in this morning, he feels it. Jesus knows it more than anybody because he's lived it. He lived on the earth and he did all these things. So we've got that straight away. We've got the love of God who pays attention and he deeply cares for us. The next part we look at is Jesus' compassion. Straight after that, Jesus' compassion, which also I link to us as Christians, that we see the compassion of Jesus and we should be like him and do the same. But Jesus was in a difficult situation. He wasn't happy, was he, at that point? He was grieving. What was his first thought? Was it to carry on to grieve, or was it to help somebody? He saw the need, and although he was in a situation where he didn't feel, well, he wasn't at his best, he was grieving, his first response was, there's a need here, and it needs meeting. And that, again, shows his compassion for those that need it. They needed healing, there was sickness, and he entered into that situation. They came to him, first of all, and he entered into those situations. Now, the disciples are with him as well. So they're seeing this. They're seeing this happen, They're seeing Jesus grieve for a friend. They're seeing Jesus also then step up and help people in need, even though he's struggling with grief. They're seeing this. So what we're seeing here, we're seeing Jesus is a God who loves us and responds to need. That's what we're seeing, aren't we? If we was to read this, do you think the disciples would see that as well? They don't seem to see it. Because in the next one, there's another situation. Maybe you might look at it and go, is it as big as the one I've just mentioned? They could have maybe gone home and sorted themselves out. I don't know exactly. But Jesus saw a need and an opportunity. The disciples saw a problem. They've just seen Jesus grieve. They've just seen Jesus show compassion to the people who needed healing and sickness. So maybe they was concerned for Jesus. That's a possibility. And that's understandable as well. But they're still learning. And we're still learning, aren't we, sometimes? But when we really know Jesus, we know what he's about, don't we? We know that he's not going to say, go away, I'm busy, is he? I don't know if anyone here is a fan of The Hobbit. I watch it every now and again. But there was a clip in the first one where Bilbo has been asked by Gandalf. I don't usually quote films, but I think this one's quite interesting, the way it plays out. So Gandalf says to Bilbo, there's a need for some of the dwarves have lost their home, they've lost what's most precious to them. Can you help them? No. He said no, because he didn't want to be bothered with the situation and putting himself out. He had his own things to think about. But then he had somebody alongside him who would guide him a little bit, Gandalf, that is, who just shows him, you should help, you can help, and you can make a difference. And so, behind his back, he kind of invites the dwarves one at a time to come round to his house for a meeting, which he wasn't ready for. But in our life sometimes, we can't be ready always and feel good if there's a need. If you're not feeling good or you're not feeling it, but there's a need, do we leave it? If there's a need and we can meet it, then Jesus is saying, meet it. Help. Do something. Do what you can. He's not expecting us to solve everything, but he's saying, do what you can. Be a part of the situation and show compassion. And the more we follow Jesus, the more we have that compassion. And like I've mentioned this morning, we need to sometimes remember we need some of these things, compassion, to trust and to kind of just follow Jesus' his example. So that's the compassion. And if we're following Jesus, then we will show compassion and we'll be reminded of it. I remember one time when I was at Preston College, I didn't have a car at this time, so I would walk to Preston College I used to live in Ingle, so it was a fair distance that I would walk to the college. There were in the days when I was really fit. I won't do that now. Walk there, and then after the shift, walk back. On the way back, there was this lady on the bridge, curled up, and she was obviously drunk. Didn't really know what was going on. A lot of people walked past her, and I did at first. I did walk past her, and then I had this strong conviction. I can't walk past her. I wanted to. I did actually walk past her, but I had this, I can only say, a strong conviction to go back to her. So I just started talking to her, and she wasn't with it, so it took a while for her to come round a bit, good enough for me to talk to her and get some sense. Then she started to tell me that she was drunk and she didn't know how to get home and this, that and the other. Now, I didn't even have a mobile phone back then, believe it or not. I had no mobile phone. So this wasn't helpful in the situation. So I had to kind of, not carry her, but link arms with her and go to the nearest shop, which was the Spar shop, ring for a taxi, get in a taxi with her, pay for the taxi, take her to her house, drop her off, and then I went on my way. But the point there is, if I didn't know Jesus, I am pretty sure I would have walked past her. I did initially, but that conviction, that was Jesus being in my heart, just said, you can't walk past her. You need to go back. And this is what Jesus is trying to show his disciples. He's healing because he cares. That's his first and main reason. But he also wants his disciples to see, this is what you need to do. If you're my disciples, this is what you need to do. And this is what we need to do. We need to view things like Jesus does. And quite often, it is so easy to not be in line with God. We can easily the language isn't quite there and we're missing bits and we're not quite understanding. Now, I've told some of you this story before, so forgive me if you've heard it. But I once was, Maddie laughs because she uses them all the time, unfortunately for her. I used to go on a lot of mission trips to Romania. And it was the first trip, actually, I went to Romania with the church I was at then. And I couldn't speak the language. I could only say 2 words, yes and no, which was yes is da, and no is no. That's all I knew. I knew that, yeah, thank you. We did have classes, believe it or not. I didn't take them very seriously, as you can see. That's what I knew, 2 words. But we had translators, so I thought we have translators, it's fine. And it was most of the time. So the reason I went over there was to do some football with the kids in the community and then show a bit of the gospel at the end. So I was doing that throughout the week, and it was really lovely. I enjoyed it, having a great time, and it was sunny as well. So, you know, what more can you ask for? And then there was one occasion we was back at the church, and they were extending the church, making it bigger. So they was doing a lot of work at the upstairs bit, and I must have looked quite tired, me and my friend. And the guy who was, maybe I'll say he was like a caretaker style role in the church, saw me and my friend and said something to us. You know, when you don't understand somebody, and you just say, yeah. That's what I did. I said, yeah, da. Okay, he went, oh. So we follow him. Okay, I don't know what we've got ourselves into here. And we go upstairs, and then we go into this room, and there's a bed on that side, and there's a bed on that side. And what he's actually asked us is, are we tired? And I've said yes. So he's walked us in, and he said, you go there, and sleep. I thought, and my friend Matthew, he's like, we need to tell him that we're not tired. I said, are you going to tell him that? We don't speak the language. I said, don't worry about it, Matthew. He's going to go in a minute. When he goes, we'll go. So he's walking out. There's a chair just at the side of the door. Puts himself down, sits down, gets a paper out, and sits there for an hour. And we're led down for an hour, not tired. The worst bit about the whole story is I had to be somewhere. I was meant to be doing the football with the kids. Thankfully, there were some other people there. So I missed an opportunity because I didn't speak the language. I wasn't in line with that guy. We didn't speak the same language, so I missed an opportunity. Thankfully, the kids were sorted, but I missed it. And that happens with God sometimes. The disciples saw what Jesus was doing, but they didn't quite get it back then. There's something just a little bit missing. But he didn't kind of be harsh with them. He keeps encouraging them to watch, learn, follow. Simple stuff, isn't it? But that's what we have to do. Watch, learn, follow, do what God's doing. And it's learning to view things like Jesus does. And that's what the disciples needed to do. So that's the next part of the story. It was a problem, wasn't it? That turned into the miracle. But Jesus made that miracle. The next one, what I want to look at is we need to bring what we have to Jesus. So they had very little, so a few bits of fish and some bread. And we're assuming it's from a boy, but it might have been a young man. But that doesn't really matter, does it, at the end of the day, who it was, whether it was a young man or a boy. That person brought what they had to the disciples. The disciples obviously brought it to Jesus, thinking, then, well, you can deal with it. But what was going on was Jesus wanted them to understand that they were part of that situation as well. So he didn't want them just to kind of let Jesus do everything. He wanted to partner with them, which we'll look at a little bit more about in a minute. But when they brought it to Jesus, there was a need, which was a massive need, but he fulfilled that need and in abundance. There was a lot more left. So that shows me that when we bring what we have to Jesus, not only will he meet all our needs individually, but he can meet the needs of the people around us and the community that we keep talking about. when we've had the prayer we keep talking about the community and the nation. Well, God has enough to meet those needs. Now, we can't meet the need of a nation in this church, but we can be part of it, can't we? And this is what Jesus is trying to teach his disciples. You can be part of that. Be part of Jesus' ministry, Jesus' work. And when we do that, we see God at work, don't we? So they brought the need to Jesus. They had that relationship. So first of all, they needed to bring themselves to Jesus, didn't they? So the disciples, first of all, they had to submit to him before they could even think about trusting him and learning from him. And I just remember in my life as well, when I wasn't a Christian, obviously I had no interest in following God, obviously. And it was only when my eyes were opened that I would realise there's a need for myself, but there's also a need for the world, and we're part of that. And it took me a while to actually acknowledge that I could be part of that bigger scale, but I learned it in the end. So let's be confident that we can make a difference. You know, if we don't believe, we can't be effective, can we? And that's why God wants to build our faith and our confidence, so we can be effective in our own lives and in our own walk with him, but about blessing others as well. And it is about blessing others. You know, if we're just living for ourselves, then we don't quite understand what God's message is, do we? It's all about, we're seeing what Jesus was doing just in this passage. He was helping others, even when he felt bad. And I'm not saying that if you're grieving, you should go out helping others all the time. I'm just saying there's not always a good situation. If you're waiting for the perfect situation, you're not going to help anybody, ever. You've just got to help where the need comes. And the need might be yourself. So help yourself, then help others. But Jesus is here this morning. I told you not to rush past the moment. And if you're in that moment and you need Jesus this morning, why wait? We sometimes have prayer after this service. We can have prayer. Me and Maddie can sit here, and whoever else wants to join us in that. And if anybody wants prayer this morning, come and we'll pray. And let's believe Jesus will do something. Because it's not about me. It's not about Maddie, whoever's praying for you. It's about praying to the one who has the answers and believing and trusting and knowing that he can do it. We could see in this miracle, he can do it. He can bless. He can help people, which is very important. The next one I want to look at is, which I've mentioned, Jesus wants to partner with us. So he wants to grow our faith. He wants us to grow and test us as well. He wants to show us that there's a way we should be living, and that's the best way to live. And to be effective, like I've mentioned, we've got to grow in our faith. A while ago, I talked about Jesus and Peter walking on water. That's the very next passage after this. So you get a little bit of the story of Jesus trying to partner with the disciples in this miracle. And then straight after, we've got Jesus walking on water and Peter being encouraged to walk towards him and do a miracle. But it's not about a miracle, it's about faith. It's always about faith and about Jesus and what Jesus came to do and what Jesus did. This is what this passage is about. It's not about the feeding of the 5,000. It's about who Jesus is, what he came to do, what he can do, and what he did. And that's the story. That's the Christian message for you. That's what we live for and live by. We might have got it wrong. We might have got it right. But if we keep following, we'll get through. We'll get through it. We will move forward. The very last point is it symbolises Jesus' great love for us. Because at that time, it was near Passover. That was one of the things that were happening. The Passover, as you all know, is about Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt and rescuing them and bringing them into, well, I know he didn't, but pointed them towards the promised land. So he said, because they trusted God and because they relied on him, they saw God at work, which I keep banging on about, because I want you to understand that God is at work in our lives and in the nation. He is. There's no ifs, buts, or maybes. He is. We might sometimes be down and feel that he's not, but he is. He is. Trust me. God is bigger than anything else. He's bigger than our doubts or political powers. He's at work. But we have to believe it. If we want to see it, we have to believe it. And again, that's what the disciples were learning. So Passover, they were set free, they were led out, and they saw God's glory. The other one, and the final part, is the breaking of the bread in the Last Supper. It symbolises that, and that symbolises Jesus' great love for us and what he did. Always pointing to what he's done and what that means for you and me. And I'm going to end as I started. Do you remember how I started? No. So I forgive you. We're good on forgiveness as Christians. The man on the cross. You remember now? Yeah. The man on the cross. He recognised Jesus. He realised who he was. And he was welcomed in. And that's where we're going. So be encouraged. Don't be afraid. Know who Jesus is. Know what he can do. And don't let the noise outside throw you off. Jesus is who he says he is, and he never changes. Amen.